Boss fired me after 17 years. No warning, no explanation. Just a meeting request at 4:30 p.m., an unusually quiet office and an envelope on the desk with my name on it. My name is David Mercer, and for almost 2 decades I gave my time, my focus, and most of my adult life to that company. I wasn't just another employee punching in. I was there before the office furniture was delivered, before we had a receptionist, before there were systems. I built process from the ground up. One spreadsheet, one policy, one sleepless night at a time. The day I got fired wasn't the end of a story. It was the start of the part they never saw coming. It started maybe 2 years before that envelope hit the desk. Things were changing. Quietly, but noticeably. The founder retired. Then, one by one, the people who'd been there since the early days began disappearing. Some were eased out. Others got tired of the pressure and left on their own. I stayed. I thought I had a responsibility. To the team, to the clients, and maybe to the version of myself that still believed loyalty counted for something. But loyalty doesn't protect you when someone with a fresh MBA and a vision deck decides your name doesn't fit into their strategy slides. I noticed it first when I stopped getting invited to meetings I used to run. No announcement, just calendar silence. Then one of my internal project documents was revised, without my name on it. Policies I wrote were suddenly being re-evaluated by a consulting firm that didn't exist 6 months earlier. I didn't confront anyone. I documented. Quietly, thoroughly, I kept every email. Archived every updated document with timestamps. Not because I was planning to sue or retaliate, but because I needed to understand what game they were playing. If they were planning a quiet exit, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of catching me off guard. People assume the moment you get fired is loud or dramatic. Mine wasn't. It was silent, almost respectful. The new operations director, a guy barely in his 30s who'd once asked me how to use our internal approval system, called me in. He didn't look me in the eye, just read a script that HR probably wrote. David, the company's going in a different direction. This is effective today. That was it. No thanks, no handshake. Just the slow shuffle of a folder sliding across the table. I looked at the folder, not him. I asked, "Do you need me to hand off anything?" He shook his head. "We've got it." Of course they thought they did. What they didn't know was that 6 months earlier I had quietly transitioned every relationship I had, from internal dependency to external partnerships. Vendors. I'd introduced a new point of contact. Clients? I'd shifted them toward team-based servicing. No one was relying on me directly anymore, not out of spite, but out of intention, because I knew this was coming. See, I'd been through transitions before. I'd seen how the pattern goes. First, they praise your stability. Then, they paint it as stagnation. Then, they replace you with someone who says the same thing you did, only louder and with different branding. So, I prepared. Not to fight, to move. A year before that day, I'd taken night courses. Not flashy tech boot camps or startup incubators, just certifications, strategic management, analytics. Things I could prove on paper. I'd updated my resume but never published it. I watched the job market like a hawk, not for applications but for patterns. Who was hiring, what they were asking for, where the industry was shifting. And here's the thing that saved me. I never let my title become my identity. I loved what I did, but I didn't confuse the company's approval with my value. That separation is what let me walk out of that office without a single word of regret. But that's not where the story ends. Because 2 weeks later, I got a call. It wasn't from a recruiter or a friend checking in. It was from a client I hadn't spoken to in months. Someone I used to manage directly. She said, "David, we heard you're no longer with them." Is that true? I confirmed it. She paused, then said, "Would you be open to some consulting work?" Off the record. And just like that, the second part of the plan started moving. See, what they didn't realize when they let me go, what they didn't ask, was how many people on the outside still picked up the phone when I called. How many processes in their operation were based on frameworks I'd developed. How many quiet systems were still tethered to decisions I'd made 5, 10, even 15 years ago. I didn't burn bridges. I just didn't announce where the exits were. And now that I was out, I had options, and time, and leverage. But I didn't rush. I didn't start a YouTube channel or write a tell-all post on LinkedIn. I just worked. On my terms, one small client, then two, then someone else called. It wasn't revenge. I wasn't trying to win. I just wanted to work where trust still mattered, where results spoke louder than politics. Funny how that's rare these days. They didn't see it coming because they never imagined I'd land on my feet faster than they could plug the hole I left. The last words that new director said to me, "We've got it," stuck with me. Not because they hurt, they didn't. I just kept wondering what exactly they thought they had. My processes, my notes, a few folders on the shared drive. They didn't realize they'd severed a relationship, not just with me, but with every quiet system that ran through my hands. And systems don't scream when you cut them. They fail in silence. One delay, one missed deadline, one angry client. I didn't plan to capitalize on their chaos. That's not how I'm wired. But when the second client called, it was clear something had shifted. They weren't just calling because they liked working with me. They were calling because they were starting to feel the difference. Questions weren't being answered. Timelines were slipping. The steady rhythm they were used to, the one I had nurtured over years, was breaking down. I didn't gloat. I listened. They wanted help. Guidance. Someone to make sense of the confusion. Not a full-time hire, just someone who knew how things used to work and how to keep them from falling apart. So I agreed. On one condition, I worked independently and I named my rate. To my surprise, they didn't flinch. They signed the contract the same day. That was my first real taste of freedom in years. The second client came with a more delicate story. Apparently, after I left, the person assigned to replace me had stepped in aggressively, rewriting protocols, undoing processes, dismissing concerns. The result? A 3-month project stalled at phase 1. They said, "We just need someone to cut through the noise. You already know the landscape." That's when it hit me. I didn't need to rebuild everything. I just needed to offer what had always been rare. Clarity. Within 4 weeks, I was managing 3 independent consulting contracts. The work was familiar, but the feeling was completely different. No middle management, no strategy meetings that spiraled into buzzwords, just problems and solutions. And time. Time I hadn't had in years. To think, to recalibrate. To notice that for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I wasn't waiting for someone's approval to do the right thing. The people I worked with now? They reached out because they trusted me. Not because of a title, not because I was in a company directory, but because my work had built its own reputation, one that didn't need a brand behind it. About 6 weeks after my last day, I got an email from someone still on the inside. Someone I trusted. All it said was, "They're struggling. They've brought in 2 people to replace you. Neither is staying." I read the message twice. I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because I had made peace with something that most people learn too late. The company you give everything to won't pause for a second when it's your time to go. They'll absorb the loss. They'll reassign your workload, they'll rewrite your contributions until they fit someone else's slide deck. And that's fine. That's their story to write. Mine was already unfolding on a different path. The months that followed weren't all smooth. There were slow weeks, contracts that fell through, clients who delayed payment. I had to learn how to chase invoices, set boundaries, manage my own schedule. But I didn't resent any of it, because every decision I made, good or bad, was mine. One afternoon I got a call from a former colleague. We hadn't spoken since the early days. He asked me how things were going. I told him the truth, better than I expected. He paused, then said, "I wish I had done what you did." I stayed. And now it's just noise. They talk about change, but they're building chaos. That word again, chaos. I used to think the job was about building structure. Now I realize the real work had always been about protecting people from chaos, internally and externally. It was never about hierarchy. It was about trust, about delivering without drama, about knowing when to speak up and when to step back. That was what made me valuable. Not the hours, not the title, not the years. Clients kept coming. Not in floods, but steadily, referrals, quiet calls, people who remembered the work, not the politics. And then came the call I didn't expect. Someone from another company, a competitor of my former employer. We'd crossed paths once, briefly at a trade show years ago. He said, "I heard you're independent now. Would you be open to helping us build something from the ground up?" The offer was real. The scope was large. It wasn't a job. It was a collaboration. One where I'd design the system, set the protocols, guide the structure. No title, no desk, just impact. I asked him how he'd heard about me. He laughed. People talk, especially when the one person who kept everything together suddenly disappears. I didn't smile. I just listened. That's when I understood what had really happened back in that 4:30 p.m. meeting. They didn't fire a problem. They released a solution they never understood, and while they were still looking for someone who could match a resume, others were reaching out for someone who could actually solve problems. That difference was everything. I took the contract, and when I signed it, I remembered the folder, the quiet dismissal, the clean break, and I felt nothing but gratitude, not for how it ended, but for the fact that it did, because if it hadn't, I'd still be sitting in that office, waiting for permission to do what I was already capable of doing on my own. They fired me without warning, but they did me a favor. They removed the ceiling I'd stopped noticing, and the view from here is clearer than it's ever been. There's a strange quiet that comes after closure. It doesn't make a sound, but you can feel it. Like a door that used to creak every time you walked through it, suddenly no longer exists. 3 months into the new contract, things were steady. More than steady, they were purposeful. I wasn't just cleaning up old messes anymore, I was building something from scratch. Every framework, every check-in system, every escalation path had my signature in it. Not literally, of course, but you could tell when a process was designed with clarity in mind. You could feel it in the way people stopped wasting time. And this time, no one was hovering behind my chair. No one second-guessing my work or rewriting it to match someone else's vision. There was just trust. It took a while for that feeling to settle in. At first, I still braced for interference. I still half expected someone to pull rank or tell me they'd be taking it from here, but no one did. They kept coming back to me, with questions, decisions, feedback. Not because they didn't know what they were doing, but because they respected what I brought. I wasn't disposable here. I wasn't background noise. I was part of the engine. One day, I found myself revisiting the old files I had backed up from my former company. Not out of nostalgia, just curiosity. I opened them slowly, page by page, looking at the layers of detail, the timelines, the fixes no one had ever noticed I made. At one point, I had built a workaround that saved the company hundreds of hours per year. Quietly, without a presentation, without needing applause, they had never known. And yet they'd let it go. I didn't feel angry, I didn't feel triumphant either, just grounded. It was never about them, it was about learning to value the thing I had always handed over too freely, my stability. I remember walking into my first review meeting with the new client. It wasn't stiff or over-formal. They sat across from me, no slides, no fluff. They said, "It's working better than we expected." Then they added, "You don't just deliver, you simplify." That word stayed with me, simplify, because that's what I'd done for so long without realizing it. I had taken complexity and turned it into rhythm. Not noise, not spectacle, rhythm. That's hard to replace. Apparently, my old employer figured that out too, eventually. About 7 months after I left, I got another message from someone I used to work with. They'd heard from a mutual client that the company was still fumbling with the system I built. They'd rotated through 3 consultants, tried automating everything, tried decentralizing, then tried undoing all of that. I asked, "What are they doing now?" He said, "They're back to square one, but this time without you." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. A few days later, I got another call. Not from a client this time, but from someone who used to sit 3 offices down from me. A quiet guy, smart, methodical. We had always respected each other's work. He was leaving the company too, voluntarily. "I watched how you left," he said. "You didn't burn anything. You just walked away clean. That stuck with me." Then he asked if I'd be open to collaborating, starting something independent. I told him, maybe, not because I doubted him, but because I finally had something I hadn't had in a long time, control over my yes. I hung up the phone and sat in silence for a while. In my old world, everything was measured in metrics. Hours worked, deliverables sent, reports filed, but no one had ever asked how sustainable it all was, whether we were building something that could last or just sprinting until it broke. Now I was finally building with endurance in mind. No more patchwork, no more duct tape solutions dressed up as innovation. Just real work, done quietly and well. A few weeks ago, I passed by the old building. Not intentionally, just part of a longer drive. The sign was still there. So were the tinted windows. But the place felt smaller. Not physically, just in my memory. It used to feel like everything. Now it felt like a hallway I'd passed through on the way to something better. I pulled over for a minute. Not to linger, just to acknowledge it, the 17 years, the good ones, the quiet ones, the ones that taught me how to be calm under pressure, and the ones that showed me the cost of being invisible too long. Then I drove away. No part of me wanted to go back, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't carrying the weight of unfinished business, because this chapter ended exactly the way it needed to, not with a dramatic exit, not with a comeback, but with clarity. They fired me without a reason. I built one for myself, and that has made all the difference.